Mr. Effing here. Here's a short video on MVC. MVC programming has been very popular now for a long time. It's one way of programming that most professionals do use at some point in time. So, this is the Model View Controller, or MVC. It's an architectural pattern commonly used for developing user interfaces that divides an application into three interconnected parts. This is done to separate internal representations of information from the way information is presented to and accepted from the user. The MVC design pattern decouples these major components, allowing for efficient code reuse and parallel development. So I got this basically quote from Wikipedia. Here's the link if you want to click on it. But basically it's this. You got the user, like the person who's using the computer. They see the view, but they use the controller. So when they manipulate the program or the app, that sends information to the model. The model updates the view, and then the user sees what happened. The reason they do this is that, for one thing, the user can't directly manipulate the model. They have to use the controller program. So the programmer and analyst has more control of what the user is able to do. The model is the actual information, the data, so it's protected because it has to, the user can't directly access it. It has to go through the controller program. And the user only gets to see what the programmer analyst wants them to see from the model using the view. So also, if you have a programming team, now you can have three different people, one person working on the controller, one on the model, and one on the view. So you can split up the work, and it's completely decoupled, and you can put it back together later. So the model is the central component of the pattern. It's the application dynamic data structure, independent of the user interface. So basically it's the data. So for example, a student database, this is where you would store all the students. The view, any representation of the information, such like a chart, diagram, table, etc. But basically this is your graphical user interface, or if you're using a system console, it's your character user interface. And then the controller, this is the program that you know, connects the model, the model to the user, and does the other information. So if you want to learn more about that, you can also check this link right here. So MVC has been around since 1976, so I'm actually slightly older than that. It was introduced by this person here, I don't want to mispronounce his name, at the Xerox Palo Alto Research Center, or PARC. It exploded in use in 1996 with the use of web objects using C and Java programming languages. It's now used in Python, Ruby, Django, and Ajax as well. The advantage of MVC over other strategies is simultaneous develop and code reuse. So for example, you develop a view for a particular model, but you could probably use it for a different model. So instead of students, you can use the same view for a Pokemon database, for a book database. So you can reuse the code with very little modification. So simultaneous development is awesome. It decouples the various components of the application, right? But mind you, if you're new to this, it's very complicated to begin with. But once you get it, then it's like, oh, okay, now I know why people are doing this. Teams can divide their developers between front end, which is the graphical user interface or the view, and the back end, which is the model, or the data structures. And they don't actually have to, know what the view looks like, and the view people don't have to know what the model looks like. They just have to know which information they're going to get later. So that's really cool, actually. So if you want, you can learn more by clicking on this link right here as well. Okay. So the code's reusable, right? Because the view code doesn't have to only work for a specific model, and the model can be used for many different views as well. So it's super awesome that you can reuse your code. So the advantages: simultaneous development, there's a high cohesion, there's very low coupling, ease of modification, and there's multiple views for a particular model. So if you don't like the way the view looks, you can modify it without changing the data structures or the database or whatever you're using. The disadvantages, though, the code is hard to navigate. It's split up into three or more different objects codes, so it's a little bit difficult, or classes. It's a bit difficult. multi-artifact consistency. So decomposing a feature into 3 artifacts can cause some scattering. So for example, maybe what the view coder thinks a person might look like a person object versus the model coder who might think the person looks different versus the controller person who's writing the controller program. So it can be difficult. And then there's a real learning curve. This is not easy to learn right away. So if you have some difficulty with it, that's just normal. So there we go. Okay, let's see. We've kind of covered this. It goes really well with object-oriented programming since we want to keep things decoupled, and we want to keep users from directly accessing data. We want to control what happens. We're using setters and getters, and in this case, an MVC structure. Okay, and let's see, anything else that's important here? Oh, well, you can learn more if you want by clicking on this link too from Stack Exchange, where people discuss the differences of regular programming versus MVC and how it works. So here's some analogies to help you out with it. Let's say we're talking about a photo studio, right? So the photo studio's got the photographer, who's the user. They can see what's on the camera, that's the view, and then there's the model that they're taking pictures of, right? So, or the sculpture. So this is all separated. So the photographer isn't directly accessing the model. The photographer is using the camera or the view to see what happens. Okay, here's a bit more on this information. If you're interested, you can click on this where I found this example of the MVC-Analogy using a photographer. Okay. So UML is the Unified Modeling Language. It's a rich language used to model your software solutions before you start coding them. There are 14 UML diagrams that you can look at, and here's a link to find out what they might look like. The creation of UML was originally motivated by the desire to standardize systems and approaches for software design. There's too many ways of designing software. And so these guys here, Booch, Jacobson, Rumbau, at the Rational Software in 1994 came up with this UML idea. And in 1997 it was adopted by the Object Management Group. And ever since then, 2005, it was published with the ISO, the International Standards Organization. So it's now it's been adopted by everybody. So just to go through, there's a lot of different UML diagrams, but here's the one that we'll be using in our course, the simplest one. When you come up with your basic object, like a person, you just want to go through what are the variables, okay, or the attributes, and then what are the methods that you need. So for example, a person needs a name, an age, and a height, for example, or maybe more variables if you're interested in it. And then just based on these 3 items, which methods would I need? I would need a default constructor where the user doesn't provide information, a user-defined constructor like name, age, and height. I would want a setter and a getter for each variable, and that would be my basic UML diagram, just planning out my person object. So I want you to do this, please, in your CCT project. Please just provide a UML for one of your main objects. So if you wanted to go further, you don't have to for our CCT, but you could do a UML for all of your major classes. So for example, there's the person model, okay, which is the person objects right here. The person controller, which would own a person model, and it would also own a person view. And it would ask the user, the user for information, like the name they want to use, the age, the height. It would send the information somewhere to the model, where it would probably activate a setter, okay. And if you wanted information, it would ask it, and then it would use a getter over here to get it. And then there's the view. It'll send the information to the view so that the user can actually see what's going on. And these, the application program would have a controller, which would have a model and a view in it. Okay, and you could run the UML for that. Okay, so here you go. This is just another one for a calculator model. If you wanted to look at this further, you can download this PowerPoint presentation later if you want to take a closer look at it in more detail on your own time. But this is the UMLs for a little calculator program. And there you go. Now you're probably wondering what it might look like to code it. So I'm just going to come over here. You can, in the link to in the video, you can download this sample code. It's in a zip file. So here is a student app. So in the student app, I've got my student, which is my model. I got my student controller, which controls what happens, and I got the view, and then I've got the student app. So if we take a look at the student app right here. Okay. So I got my public static void main just to run the program. I clear up the system console, and then what I do, the first thing I do is I make a view and I make a model, and I send the view and the model to the student controller program, which I call the controller. So I make a student view, the view, a student, which is the model, and I send it to the controller. And there you go. And then I can access the controller and send it information. And then the controller will send that information to the model and to the view, which the user will see. And then this is just some less acceptable way of doing things. I just use system.out.printlines instead of making good use of the view, unfortunately. There you go. You can just go through. So this is a very simple, very basic, but not a very, very awesome way of doing MVC programming. So here's the app. Okay, the app's got the controller. So the controller is just a controller class. It's got a model which was sent to it. It's got a view. Here's the constructor right here that takes the model and the view from the app program, and then it's got its methods like sending to the model, setting a name, getting a name from the model. Okay, and then there's also, let's see, update the view. So printing the information to the view using the view code. Okay, and then here's the view code right here. So when you send the information to the view, you're sending it student name, student number, its mean, and its grades, and it prints it all out on the screen. Okay, and then the student, which is the model, the student has a student number, a name, 4 grades, and it's got setters and getters for all of those important informations. And it also has a method for calculating an average based on the grades. And of course it has the toString method, which is used if you want to store students in a database. So maybe I'm not using it this time, but it's there for future use. So I'm just going to run that quick just to show you what it looks like. Okay. So I've got I made a couple students, John and Jane Doe. I'm bypassing the view, which is poor coding method, but that's okay. And I'm going to add a student. So for example, I'll add, let's see, Jerry Perry. Okay, and Jerry Perry, it just makes some marks for Jerry Perry and gives Jerry Perry an average right there. There you go. All right. So now here's a slightly better one here. This uses the MVC method to make a calculator. So just going to compile that and run this one. This one's a little bit better. There we go. So for this very simple graphical user interface, so the view is making the graphical user interface. I just type in my 2 numbers, like 10 and 20, and I go adds the numbers to give me 30. I also sent the information to the system console just to error check and make sure things are working. Hit subtract, get that. Hit the multiplication button, get that. Division, there we go, and modulus as well, right there. Okay, and that works. Okay, so the view is just the graphical user interface that we could see there. So I made a JFrame, and I put all the things in it, like the labels, the buttons, and the text fields. Okay, and added them, and then I was getting information from the text fields, so I could use that information. Okay, and I've got the action listeners, and I provide an error message if necessary. Okay, there we go. And then for the model, which is the calculator, this is where I store the numbers and get the result based on the operation. So was it a sum, a difference, a product, or a quotient, or a modulus? Right, there you go. And for the controller program, right here, I have a view and a model. So I've got the this is where I interact between the view and the model. Okay, and I have action performed here. So when I get the information, what do I do with it? So I'm listening for a difference button, I'm listening for the product button, I'm listening for the quotient button, and I'm listening for the modulus button, etc. This was really tricky to learn how to do, so you can use this as a template to figure out how to do your own program. And of course I've got my app code right here. So the app code is pretty simple. Look at that, all fits on one tiny little page right here. So I cleared the screen because I was using the system console. I made a view, I made a model. I sent the view and the model to my controller program so it could do the work for the rest of the program, and I made it visible. That's it. That's all the app does. So if you go online and you read about MVC, they'll just say, oh, go do some programming projects, but they don't really give you any good sample code to figure out how to do that. So here you go. Here's some sample code on how to make a small little MVC project. I hope this helps. I think it will. So there you go. Good luck, and have some fun with this really important concept, and I hope this explained it well for you.